Last year, two games near and dear to my heart got a remastered release which I never would have thought possible. Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Rescue Team DX and Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. This is the final episode in a three-part series discussing how both titles have changed and improved from their original releases, so if you haven't seen the first two episodes, I would highly recommend checking those out first, as I'll be wrapping up this entire discussion series at the end. This video on the gameplay of both titles is about half of my 54-page script for this entire video series, so buckle up. As always, be aware of spoilers for both Rescue Team DX and Xenoblade Definitive, as well as some gameplay of other games in their respective series for this episode. Without further ado, let's wrap up Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Rescue Team DX vs Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, with discussing the gameplay changes and improvements of each respective remake. Pokémon Mystery Dungeon introduced dungeon crawling gameplay to the Pokémon brand. The heroes navigate mystery dungeons, with randomly generated floor layouts every time. On each floor, the player must find the stairs to make it to the next floor and progress through the dungeon. Mystery dungeons are riddled with enemies, which may wander around, be found sleeping, or even appear in a monster house. One can find items throughout the dungeons, or in shops, and inventory management is vital in these games. The player can recruit additional teammates and customize their parties. These mechanics have existed throughout the Mystery Dungeon series. The first entries of Blue and Red Rescue Team had AI that was, frankly, absolutely perfect, no problems to be seen. Ronski, no! No, Ronski! Whether it be teammates walking straight into danger and burning through every last one of your reviver seeds after being one-shotted, teammates sitting around doing absolutely nothing unless you actually swap places with them or find some other way to manually place them into position and spend several turns just to get yourself back into position. Or for me, even having your teammate straight up attack you during the final boss of the game because linked moves starting with Swords Dance, which doesn't need a direction since it's just an attack buff, but then having the moves linked to it which do require a direction, just keep going the same direction, results in allies attacking you. The AI of Red and Blue Rescue Team is frankly garbage. So how does Rescue Team DX's AI add up? Honestly, it's fantastic. It takes the lessons learned from the Mystery Dungeon series up to this point, such as AI improvements brought about by titles such as Super Mystery Dungeon, and it takes it much further to make a much more smooth experience. Allies will go and collect items when there's no enemies nearby. They'll position themselves to attack enemies with close range or even long distance attacks. A stark contrast to allies in the original, where they just followed you and attacked if it's possible from their current position. They're actually allies now which you can rely on, not just dumb AI that wanders behind you and does stuff only if it's possible from its current position. As well, your available options are now more flexible than ever before. Super Mystery Dungeon introduced the ability to swap Pokémon you are playing as across your party, at least during non-story missions. Rescue Team DX takes that and makes it available almost anywhere. Instead of being locked into whoever your leader is for the entire dungeon, you can now literally swap who among your party you're playing as at any time. So if one of your allies gets lost on the other side of the dungeon, you can take control of them and use your 3000 IQ God Gamer Mega Plays to get out of that situation. In Super Mystery Dungeon, it felt like something you could just kind of do during these side missions, but in Rescue Team DX, it's an actual main game mechanic usable at any time. Going through dungeons in Blue and Red Rescue Team and dealing with enemies is almost completely menu navigation, especially as it goes on. You can set one move to be able to use outside of menu navigation, but the other three you need to open your move menu and select them from there, which you can get really fast at if you're me. But what's even faster and nicer is Rescue Team DX's ability to hold one button and then have hotkeys for all four of your moves on the spot, in addition to showing what type they are, type effectiveness, and area of attack. It's absolutely fantastic. And speaking of moves, something typical of the entire Mystery Dungeon series is having starting moves akin to what you may see on these Pokemon at this level in a main series game, So maybe 1 or 2 usable moves, and the rest mostly just trash like Growl or Leer. This kinda sucks when you need so many usable attacks for taking on the Pokemon around in dungeons, and has you rely on A-button attacks a decent bit, which has unlimited uses but little damage. A attacks are gone in Rescue Team DX, but now you start out with movesets that are absolutely busted. No matter which of the starters you and your partner are, you're armed with 4 incredible moves that cover a wide range of types. Like, just look at Pikachu, Fake Out, Electro Ball, Grass Knot, Iron Tail, or look at Cubone, Headbutt, Bone Club, Brutal Swing, Brick Break. Brutal Swing is a 2-tile full AoE move, by the way. No matter who you've got, you're going to have 4 solid moves, and you don't really need to rely on the now non-existent A attacks. And on the topic of the starters, in Blue and Red Rescue Team, you were stuck with whatever Pokemon the personality test assigned you. You were assigned points into a nature for every answer in the test, and put into whichever nature you had the most points in, along with which gender you chose. However, not every Pokemon had a personality type assigned to both genders, just one or the other. What this meant was that if you wanted to play as a dude, it's impossible to be Eevee, Chikorita, or Skitty, and if you're a dudette, it's impossible to be a Meowth, Machop, or Cyndaquil. In addition, dude means the box at the bottom of the screen is always blue, and a hella ugly pink if you're a dudette. As far as I know, there's no way to change this. In Rescue Team DX, however, whichever gender you choose has no effect on any display boxes, and if you don't like what you got as your Pokemon, you can just choose whoever you want manually, first brought about by Super Mystery Dungeon. Before people tell me you can choose your starter in Gates, yes you could, but there was no personality test. This means you can now be whichever Pokemon you want without retaking the test and giving specific answers, and there's no gender-locked Pokemon. My only complaint to the starter system is that there's no additional starters available over the original releases. I know it's a Gen 3 game, but other titles have had Pokemon already available in this game as starters anyway, such as Vulpix. I love Vulpix. Or even, despite this being a Gen 3 game, it includes every new evolution and pre-evolution introduced in later generations, as well as Riolu and Lucario, as a Lucario statue did exist in the original. In DX, the statue makes Riolu/Lucario now spawn. So what if it included later starter Pokemon in addition as well? Like, imagine playing as, say, Scorbunny or Sobble or whatnot throughout this adventure. Sorry, Grookey Gang. The only starter Pokemon here I really like is Eevee. In Explorers and Super though, there's always at least a few I'm fond of. So in Rescue Team, I never know what to make my partner, because I'm not too attached to any of them really. I wish there had been more of a selection. This is another example of sticking too closely to the original, I would argue, as we've discussed in Part 1 and Part 2 of the series. Another little change when it comes to you and your partner is the fact that your partner will continue to follow you around in the post-game, as opposed to just chilling in a friend area forever. It's a small change, but it makes a big impact and retains so much more charm than the original. Back to dungeon gameplay. In Blue and Red Rescue Team, your team could be comprised of anywhere from 1 to 4 Pokemon. However, you can only recruit as many other Pokemon in dungeons as you have currently available party slots. So if you go in with 2 party members, you can recruit 2 more along the way, 3 party members, and you can only recruit 1 more Pokemon in the dungeon. As well, you can only recruit allies during non-story missions, and only if you have the corresponding friend area available. So your ability to gain allies is rather limited. In Rescue Team DX, it has a party limit of 3 rather than 4 allies, similar to Super Mystery Dungeon. It does kind of suck not being able to go into a dungeon with a team of 4, but when we discuss some other mechanics later on, I suppose it sort of makes sense because of how busted that could be. When it comes to recruiting allies in Rescue Team DX, the team you bring in has no effect on this. You can recruit up to 5 party members in addition to your 3 you came into the dungeon with. If you recruit somebody else when you already have 5 additional allies, you need to choose one to ditch by the road with no directions. You also need to clear or escape the dungeon with these additional allies in tow in order to keep them, where they're now available to be used as the main 3 ones you go into a dungeon with. So if any of them faints while in a dungeon and isn't revived, you don't keep them. As well, you can recruit Pokemon without the required friend area and they can come along throughout the dungeon, you just won't be able to keep them after clearing the dungeon. This whole system makes it so that while your main 3 Pokemon stay relatively the same, your additional allies will be a completely different group of Pokemon based on the available enemies in the dungeon. As well, you're no longer blocked from recruiting allies during most story missions, though there are some exceptions such as the Fugitives phase or the final dungeon of the main game. You can also go into the dungeon with somebody you are escorting for a mission you've accepted, so that, plus your 3, plus 5, makes a maximum of 9 allies at once. Though, typically the one you're escorting for missions doesn't stick around for long, as they leave once they reach their destination, so most of the time your maximum is 8 allies. What this means is you can go through dungeons and destroy bosses with a small private army. It's absurd to the extreme, and I love it. There's never been parties of this size in the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon series before. However, it's far from perfect. While you can freely select and deselect usable moves for your main 3 party allies, or give them various commands such as exploring on their own or staying still and not attacking, the up to 5 allies that you recruit have no options like this. This is important if you want to recruit somebody in specific, as you can only recruit them if whoever you are currently playing deals the final blow, and you can't tell these additional allies to not attack. This is most devastating when hunting shiny Pokemon, a new addition to the spin-off series, and I cannot express how many shinies I lost, and even Mew, because my allies were like, haha, attack, go, bam. At the minimum, there should be an option to tell these additional allies either they are allowed to attack, or they're not allowed to. It's not fair to the player to have their setup go completely wrong because of undecidable ally AI behavior. When it comes to the management of menus in dungeons though, the use of items is easier than it's ever been with clear icons for what every item is. In Blue and Red Rescue Team, it was all just text. Now there's icons by each item to show what type it is, and hovering over it shows an art of the item, with literally every single different item in the game having its own unique drawing. It's so charming to see that literally every item in the game got its own drawing. It would have been so easy to just make every seed look the same, every orb look the same, and whatnot. Instead, the time was taken to give everything its own look, its own charm, and it really helps bring this world to life. And speaking of items, there's no longer a limit on Kangaskhan's storage. No more tough luck, you can't store any more stuff, which I'm so thankful for. And when it comes to other services in Pokemon Square, this is a crazy line of subjects we're going down, isn't it? Gulpin now allows you to link moves together and relearn any previous moves for free, and offers a new move tutor service to give you some very spicy additional moves into postgame. Makuhita Dojo has been completely changed now, into a place that allows you to spend dojo tickets to do short bursts of training that increase move experience, a mechanic brought to Rescue Team TX from the last couple previous titles. Another additional note I had no idea where to throw in, boss battles are actually spicy and challenging now. The battlefield may change up, or you may need to avoid certain tiles. It makes it actually feel like bosses instead of more generic enemies with just a bunch of extra health. In terms of gameplay, Rescue Team TX also brings some new features to the table not yet seen in the Mystery Dungeon series. An example of this is Auto Mode, which can be activated with a button press and allow your team to search for the stairs automatically, and stop to give control back to the player whenever they are in proximity of an enemy. I originally thought this was completely useless, or just something meant for new players, but soon fell in love with it. If you change your settings, you can make Auto Mode have you navigate the dungeon at sonic speed, saving so much time. When you're spending hours on end in 99 floor dungeons, or even just clearing generic missions in regular dungeons, or doing just about anything, saving time is so nice. Every future Mystery Dungeon game should have an Auto Mode. The biggest new addition to mechanics, however, is how this game changed the use for gummies from the original release. In Blue and Red, gummies would increase your Pokemon's IQ, which unlocks additional IQ skills which provide myriad benefits, though it's one hell of a grind to get every IQ skill on even one Pokemon. Instead, in Rescue Team DX, this system has been replaced by rare qualities, of which every Pokemon can only have a maximum of 1. Eating a gummy raises a stat and has a chance of unlocking a rare quality, and eating a DX gummy guarantees a rare quality. If you unlock a rare quality on a Pokemon while you already have one, you must choose one to keep and one to trash. These rare qualities will affect the entire team for various effects, such as better recruitment rate, having every rapid hit move connect, or restore move uses for killing enemies, among countless else. Because they affect the entire team, there are some pretty busted combinations you can run, which is also probably the reason why you can only bring in a team of 3 instead of 4. The 5 allies you recruit can also have rare qualities which will affect your whole team, but all you can do is cross your fingers you get something good. Pokémon Mystery Dungeon has 4 main titles up to Super, and while Rescue Team DX is a remake of the first game, the way it improves on the AI, well, mostly, and how it introduces new mechanics to the series, such as rare qualities, makes the game feel like it uses the mechanics of a Pokémon Mystery Dungeon 5, rather than just being a remake of the original. It's a remake of the first game, with mechanics and AI improvements as if it's a brand new game to the series. While I do love this, I do have one massive problem with the system of rare qualities. There exist 34 rare qualities in the game, so if you give one of your allies a DX Gummy, you've only got a 1 in 34 chance of actually getting the rare quality you want, or a 1 in 33 if you already have a rare quality on. If you get a quality you don't want, you have to straight up trash it. It doesn't go into like a menu of equipable rare qualities for that Pokemon. This means that as you keep spending your valuable DX Gummies, you're not making it any easier to get the rare quality you want. You're still just as likely to get the same trash rare quality again instead of what you're looking for. Every DX Gummy you spend is only a 3% chance of getting whatever specific quality you want, and those odds never get any better. What should happen when you get a new rare quality is it goes into like a list of available rare qualities on that Pokemon, and you never have to worry about rolling that one again, and it will increase your odds of getting what you need. And you can change rare qualities on them before you enter any dungeon from the list of available rare qualities on that Pokemon. It seems like a no-brainer. Instead, you have a system where you could spend every DX Gummy you have without getting any closer to what you actually want, and there's no way to change between good rare qualities on a Pokemon. If you have an awesome rare quality on somebody, but are given the choice to have another, you need to choose between those two and risk potentially never getting the chance to have the other one again, unless you spam countless DX Gummies for a 3% chance, instead of having both options now be available and equipable before dungeons. Honestly, I hate this. It makes it so stupidly hard to get whatever specific setup you're aiming towards. I got really lucky when it came to what rare qualities I got on my main team, but my chances of that happening for me were next to none. And if I ever wanted to change those rare qualities on them, I risk never having my current specific setup ever again. Literally all they had to do was have rare qualities become interchangeable on each Pokemon you get them on. Have a menu where you can assign what rare quality you want on each of your allies from their available ones before going into a dungeon. This would make teams so much more customizable, allow DX Gummies to actually bring you closer to getting what you need along with other benefits along the way, and not have to worry about potentially permanently screwing yourself by losing a rare quality until you're willing to spam a 3% chance until you get it again. I'm honestly completely stunned that the system I proposed isn't in the game instead of what we got. If an Explorer's remake ever comes out in this style, there's no excuse for them to not fix this clearly flawed system of gaining and assigning rare qualities. That major gripe aside, honestly, the gameplay of this title feels better than it's ever been. I've kinda despised Mystery Dungeon gameplay for a long time, especially the first two, because it was such a clunky mess in so many ways. I got into the series because of its story and gameplay, and would replay Explorers annually because of that. The gameplay felt like a necessary evil I had to put up with along the way. While Rescue Team DX introduces its own unique mechanics which have their own problems, it fixes almost every problem I've had with the gameplay in series past. This game made me feel like this was the first time I got to genuinely really enjoy Mystery Dungeon gameplay, rather than just putting up with it. In terms of gameplay, I really do genuinely believe this is the most fun Pokémon Mystery Dungeon game to date. Xenoblade Chronicles introduced a system of real-time combat through its gameplay. A party is comprised of 3 members, all of which have 8 arts at the bottom of the screen, and 1 talent art in the center of them all. The 8 arts can be changed out between several options each character has, unless you're literally the main character of the game, where you're locked into those 8, and that's it, because that makes sense. Though, to be fair, his talent art is kind of 8 options in one. There's a few unofficial designated roles for characters to be thrown into, such as attacking characters to deal damage, tanks to take aggro and absorb or dodge damage, and supporting characters, which is also based on how the blades of Xenoblade Chronicles 2 are categorized. Something very interesting about this game is you can play as literally any of the 7 party members you want. Your 2 active allies you don't play as are just controlled by AI with the same tools a player would have anyway. Because of this, I always thought Xenoblade Chronicles would be fantastic for co-op play, since it's just an AI controlling the tools other players would have anyway. Xenoblade Chronicles experimented with some multiplayer with X on the Wii U, where players could form a party for specific multiplayer missions, all going in with their own avatar. This was really cool, and was a neat way to experiment with multiplayer in a Xenoblade game, and I'm so sad it hasn't been pursued since then, or in, say, Definitive Edition. I can understand why it wasn't done though. Just about the biggest way to add complexity to the programming of any game is by adding multiplayer. Xenoblade Chronicles is way more popular nowadays than it's ever been though, so I'll keep my fingers crossed that one day we'll have this avenue be explored and funded further in this massive opportunity for incredible co-op gameplay. Every character has their own unique playstyle and their own skill trees to develop. One can share allies' skills from their trees with one another if their affinity is high enough, and if the player has enough affinity coins to essentially rent out the skill. You gain an affinity coin for each individual character when they level up, and a coin for the entire party whenever a unique boss is killed for the first time. For exploration, the player can discover locations and landmarks, which contributes to the area map and gives experience and fast travel points. Landmarks can be fast traveled to, but not locations. Everywhere you go has a part of the map mapped out in a grid in the original release, and a circle area around you in Definitive. However, finding every location and landmark in an area gives you a full complete map on the spot. Every character has several equipment slots, which may also have slots for gems which can be used to further augment your abilities. You can make additional gems through crafting with crystals you've collected, which is, unfortunately, a whole lot of RNG. Quests can be accepted around the world, with some only being available at certain times, other quests completed first, reputation in certain areas of the world, or certain people registered on the affinity chart. Some quests are timed, meaning once you get far enough in the story, that quest becomes unavailable forever, so better do it as soon as you can. Unfortunately, there's no way to tell what quests you're missing unless you're keeping an eye on some sort of guide. The game doesn't tell you when you're missing quests or how to get them. The affinity chart is developed as you complete quests and build bonds between people, as well as talking to people at certain times and learning about their relationships from their dialogue. The affinity chart also shows what your reputation in each area is, which affects what quests are available and what items you can trade from the citizens. Throughout the journey, you can also rebuild Colony 6, which was brought to ruin during the early events of the game. This involves collecting money and several specific items, most of which are only available in certain areas as the story goes on, so Colony 6 can't finish construction until basically the end of the game, and there's only so much you can repair it at various stages of the journey. Collectibles at each area can be inserted into the Collectopedia, requiring one of each item to spend to fill each slot of a page for that 100%. Some areas later become unavailable due to story reasons. Maybe there's a battle going on over there, maybe it moved, or maybe the area straight up exploded, and all remaining quests in the area become unavailable, and it's no longer possible to discover any missing locations or landmarks. So, what was changed for the gameplay in Definitive Edition? Core gameplay is almost completely the same, as if the core gameplay code was mostly just reused for this title, just with a fresh coat of paint on it and some minor changes. The only real core gameplay changes are to the UI, which is now much more refined and easy to understand. Party character icons and health statuses is now much smaller on the side, along with any buffs and debuffs to the individual party members. In the original, for both allies and enemies, there would be one UI slot for buffs and one UI slot for debuffs, so if there's multiple buffs or debuffs, it'll just alternate between showing those additional effects. In Definitive Edition, it constantly shows multiple buffs and debuffs, making it much easier to fully understand all of what's happening at once. It seems like there is a maximum of 4 buffs or debuffs being shown at once, even on enemies, even though there's this entire top bar worth of space to put on more than that. Still, 4 is better than 1 at a time, though I do wonder why this additional space at the top wasn't as effectively used as it could have been. Visions will now display initially at the top center, and then move to the top right corner as opposed to staying in the top center. This makes it much easier to see additional information on screen, such as enemy levels, health bars, buffs and debuffs, and more. Directional arts that do additional effects or damage from a certain side of the enemy will now have an exclamation point to show when you're in position for the additional effect. This is wonderful because sometimes you'll think you're facing an enemy's back or side, and then you don't get the bonus damage because you were just slightly off. Okay, let's do my side attacks here. What, it didn't count us from the side? It feels so bad. Yeah, I heard you the first 5,000 times, Lorithia. Stop saying that! So annoying. How many times is she gonna say you'll pay for your insult? Jeez, she's like a broken record. Now in Definitive Edition, I can position myself behind, and if there's no exclamation point, I can be like, how the heck is this not behind? But then position myself properly, and then backslash. In addition, any arts that have additional effects because of using a prior art, or any arts that have additional effects because of an enemy state, will also have an exclamation point. So if the enemy is inflicted with break and can be toppled with a topple art, topple arts will have this icon. If the enemy has an aura active, Monado Purge will have this icon to signify that you can eliminate this aura. If you have a vision of an enemy using a talent art, Monado Shield will have this icon to signify you can protect your party against talent arts with it. It seems like a small change, but it makes a big impact. It's especially useful for new players who don't know when the best time to use each art is, but also helps for veteran players for direct feedback about how the game thinks they're positioned and more. The driver combo, which is what Xenoblade Chronicles 2 basically calls this, of break to topple to daze, in the original there would be a symbol over the enemy that shows when they're afflicted with each of these statuses. In Definitive, there's now a bar that shows you exactly how long each of these effects will last, so you now know how much time you have left to inflict the next status to get a chain of effects going, as opposed to just randomly guessing and hope you get the next effect in time. As well, QuickTime events now have 2 rings to them, with the outside one being more beneficial typically. Now these QuickTime events actually engage you a bit with the challenge of hitting the outside one, and you feel cool for hitting it even as it gets relatively easy, instead of just having one big circle with the same effect each time. One of the only big changes to the core gameplay mechanics I could find apart from the UI and QuickTime events is they completely changed how jumping works. If you just jump forward in both, you probably won't notice a difference. But in the original, you could do this one technique where you jumped so insanely far with a side jump. You can't do this in Definitive anymore, and it saddens me. It served literally no purpose in the original, it was just fun to do. And that's a fun thing to do while going from point A to point B, now gone. When it comes to getting from point A to point B now though, it's easier than ever before. The map will now display a path to get to your current objective, which could be the main story, or a quest which you set as active. Active quests will also have their destinations properly displayed on the map, as opposed to you just needing to do your best to figure out where to go. This even affects the collectible items during collection quests, instead of you randomly going around picking up every single item until you have enough of what you need. This helps you get these side quests done with leagues better convenience than the original, and saves so much time. However, repairing Colony 6 does not count as a quest per se, meaning important items to obtain or enemies to obtain them from will not be marked on the map, and you cannot set them as your active quest. This means that just like the original, you could spend like the next 3,000 years like I did, looking for something like the 2 ice cabbages you need, which have the highest spawn rate of 6% at night only, in a handful of Black Mountain locations. As well, there's no way to tell how to trigger quests being available. So while once you get a quest everything will be marked out on your map, actually getting those quests in the first place is a bit more complicated. Sometimes you'll need to have talked to somebody so they'll register on your affinity chart. Sometimes you need so many stars of reputation in that area. Heck, there was even this one quest in Colony 9, which only becomes available if you talk to this one guy at a specific time and give a certain answer to his question. I chose the option that didn't unlock the quest, and was just stuck permanently locked out of that quest forever. So while the game now gives you plenty of tools for finishing your accepted quests, actually completing every quest essentially requires eyeing Xenoblade Wiki like a hawk to make sure you don't miss the trillion quests you won't get by not completing obscure prerequisites. I really wish Xenoblade Definitive gave the player a list of quests that can exist at your point in the story and tell you the conditions to unlock them. And speaking of needing to eye other sites in order to make progress, the affinity chart. Whenever you talk to a named NPC for the first time, they will be added to your affinity chart. There's no way to tell by looking at somebody whether they're on your affinity chart yet though. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 remedied this by including a yellow star over somebody you haven't talked to, or they have dialogue you haven't seen yet. Monolith Soft literally learned from their mistake here, but they didn't implement that change from Xenoblade 2 into the remake of 1. As well, when you talk to a named NPC with some sort of relationship to somebody else on your affinity chart, you may get an affinity link between the two of them showing how they view one another. Most typical playthrough affinity links will just be automatically obtained through completing quests. But the thing is, to get some links, you need to get the dialogue from them that states their relationship with this other person. About every named NPC has 2 dialogue options when you talk to them, so better talk to them twice, and their available dialogue might be subject to change every couple in-game hours. So I would go back and forth between my affinity chart and a graphic that shows a completed affinity chart. I then look up what time I need to talk to one of them on a guide I found, as well as any prerequisites to get that dialogue from them, such as completing certain quests. So it may be something like, talk to so-and-so between 15 and 17. I then look up their routes on Xenoblade Wiki, and go talk to them at that time. Sometimes that would be enough to get that link, but other times it just wouldn't be. So I'd keep changing the time by 2 hours, and talking to that NPC twice every in-game 2 hours. Usually that would be enough, but sometimes that wasn't even enough when I could swear I had all the prerequisites according to the guides I found. Sometimes there were some links that were just impossible for me to get from now on, because I needed to talk to somebody specific during a quest I did like 20 hours of gameplay ago. And then there were the ones I could never get for who knows what reason why. Or if you wanted a decked out affinity chart and were paying even less attention to multiple guides in Xenoblade Wiki than me, or it was your first ever playthrough and you just didn't know what would happen to the High Entia, after a certain point in the story almost the entire High Entia area gets grayed out. You could never get those links from now on. To be fair, you technically don't need every possible affinity link for 100% completion if you count that as, say, all achievements completed. The hardest affinity link based achievement is Routes Across the World, which requires 200 affinity links, which actually leaves quite a decent bit of room for links that you can never get anymore, assuming you've at least been doing quests, especially for the High Entia. Still, to get this achievement, you need to be going around talking to people twice over and over while changing the game by 2 hours, while eyeing guides and Xenoblade Wiki like a crazed hawk, with absolutely no guidance from the actual game. I really think they should have shown grayed out links on the chart to signify it's a link that you can get instead of just guessing, along with conditions of how to get it. Speaking of other things you can miss forever with no additional help from a definitive, unique monsters. Unique monsters are a way to get what are called affinity coins. These coins can be used for party members to essentially rent skills from one another, with different skills costing different coin amounts. The 2 ways to get affinity coins are by leveling up, 1 per level, and killing a unique monster for the first time, 1 per unique monster. You can gain 98 affinity coins from going from level 1 to 99, and 157 for each unique monster in the world, for a maximum of 255 affinity coins in one playthrough. Unique monsters exist across the world, including in areas that become permanently unavailable later in the story. They are not marked on the map, and unless you've been furiously jotting down every unique monster you kill for the first time, there's absolutely no way to tell whether you've killed them yet or not, which resulted in me fighting the same unique monsters multiple times because I wasn't sure whether I had their affinity coin yet. Every time you fast travel, there's only even a 30% chance the boss respawns typically. This means I would sometimes kill a unique boss during my travels, but once I go through the list one by one of unique monsters on Xenoblade Wiki, I'll get to where it spawns and not see it there, and I'd be hella confused about whether I killed it already, or whether I was looking in the wrong spot. Heck, there was even this one in Central Factory I thought I killed, because I remembered fighting enemies like that in this area, but I wanted to make sure I actually had, and I wanted to track it down. I had to go back to watch my own playthrough of roughly where I thought I killed it. Couldn't find it in the footage, so I kept looking for it in-game, and found it only actually spawns once I entered this little alcove, and I hadn't killed it yet. As I mentioned, some areas become permanently unavailable later on. So if you don't kill every single unique boss in that area before it gets deleted, well, say goodbye to ever having 255 affinity coins on that file, which nearly happened to me with the one boss I mentioned. Heck, if I didn't have footage of where I thought I killed it in my playthrough previously to check, I would have straight up left thinking I got it already, and then never gotten that affinity coin from Mr. I like to hide and you'll never get my coin. Definitive Edition has done nothing to help you keep track of unique monsters. At least Xenoblade 2 had tombstones in front of each unique boss you've killed previously, and you could interact with a tombstone to fight the boss again. Nothing like that for Definitive. 30% respawn chance every time you go there, not so much as an icon to show you've killed it already. So even if you're missing, say, 1 or 2 affinity coins from the max of 255, and it's not from any of the bosses that you can't reach anymore, then there's absolutely no way to tell who has the coin you need without going around the entire world killing every single unique boss. And doing that might just tell you it's from an unreachable boss after all. What Definitive should have had was a list for each area, similar to the Collectopedia, except showing every unique boss in that area, where it spawns and at what time, and whether you've killed it yet or not. Definitive also does not add any way to get more than 255 affinity coins in one playthrough. The only way to gain more is to start a new game plus. You won't be able to get any more leveling up affinity coins if you are already at level 99, but every unique boss will now have a coin obtainable again, meaning you can get another 157 affinity coins in each subsequent new game plus down a chain of multiple playthroughs. So while you can obtain the maximum amount of affinity coins at 999, to do this, you will need to have done a full playthrough where you kill all the unique monsters in the world at least 6 times over. Technically, you don't need to kill every unique monster in the world in each playthrough, since 6 playthroughs would add up to a maximum of 1040 coins, so you could afford to miss 41 unique boss battles within those 6 playthroughs. Why is there no way to get closer to the affinity coin cap without literally needing to play the game while unique monster hunting a total of 6 times? Definitive added the ability to level down, in case you want to challenge yourself with any bosses or whatnot like I did. In my opinion, Definitive should have made it so that you could continue gaining coins anytime you leveled up in the level 90 range, even if you've gotten those corresponding coins before. That would mean you could continue gaining coins without having to play the entire game over and over again, and missing unique monsters in the world wouldn't have to be like, well, that's an affinity coin I'm never getting now. Whether it be quests, affinity links, or unique monsters, I'm convinced that Xenoblade Chronicles is one of the easiest games to get potentially screwed out of obtaining a perfect 100% by missing something small somewhere after not constantly looking at several guides and Xenoblade Wiki because of no help from the game itself and no systems in place to avoid the chances of permanently missing something. A lot of people may only classify 100% as doing every achievement, which is very possible without every quest done, every affinity link gained, or every unique boss killed. But if you want a perfect file, this is near impossible, because the game keeps track of none of this for you, and you just have to hope you don't miss something random after like your 6th playthrough for all affinity coins. Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition was an opportunity to fix this major problem with the original, to enact systems that help people to not get permanently locked out of content and progress because they didn't eye Xenoblade Wiki like a hawk. I do like some of the changes that make quests easier, such as map markers for currently accepted quests. It's a major game changer that actually makes doing quests leagues better. But when it comes to actually trying to perfect a file, it's just a drop in the pond in terms of what changes should have been done to fix one of the most frustrating games in history for completionists. A few years ago, I tried to 100% Xenoblade Chronicles, and failed because I missed one of the Sword Valley quests I didn't know existed. Now coming closer to a non-new game plus 100% than ever before with Definitive Edition, I feel like I can now fully understand the frustration of trying to perfect Xenoblade Chronicles. I never would have been able to talk about Xenoblade from a completionist perspective until last year, but now that I've put in as much time as I have, it's evident to me how many changes from the original really were necessary for the remake for completionists, and just weren't implemented in any way. Do yourself a favor and never try to perfect a save file in Xenoblade Chronicles. Heck, this whole tangent didn't even mention exclusive gems, armor, and weapons that you can just accidentally sell because you have no indication that you're never going to be able to get another one again. Let's shift this discussion to what's new for the gameplay that Definitive brought to the table. One of the greatest additional features is Fashion Armor, which is a feature introduced by Xenoblade Chronicles X. Each character has two versions of armor slots, one for the actual armor that affects your stats, and the other for what armor it will appear that they're wearing. Anything you've held previously will be available in Fashion Armor, so you don't even need to worry about using up an armor item for fashion and not being able to use it elsewhere. This means that you can finally experience the story of Xenoblade Chronicles without everybody looking like they're walking home from a bar after being kicked out of the Dungeons & Dragons costume party, unless that's actually how you want them to look. Now you can be using whatever armor you like with no negative stat impact. Definitive also added several new costumes, the best of which I'd argue is the beach stuff. When I heard there was going to be beach stuff, at first I thought it would just be an excuse to strip down the characters for fan service and that's about it. No charm to it or anything. I was so wrong. You can have Shulk run around the world in full diving gear, Charlotte can be a freaking pirate, or a favorite of both mine and one of my mods, Ricky can be a gosh darn pineapple now. Some of these outfits are so awesome and hilarious that you can't help but love them. My one complaint with the fashion armor is there's no way to easily select the default look of each character. Even in the list of costume items, there's nothing that says default. So if you actually want the default look again because, I don't know, you're doing a playthrough of the Xenoblade Chronicles 1, 2, Torna, and Future Connected series that's over 200 parts long, then you just need to look at a picture of the default or keep it in the back of your head and go through each of the items until you find whatever you think is closest to default. This is one of those things where there could have been such an easy change, but it wasn't bothered to do so. Literally just put default in brackets next to whatever armor item is default for everybody. Even I could program that much. I feel like the more time I put into Definitive Edition, the more I started to dislike it from so many numerous things that just needed a small change to be leagues better, but it just wasn't bothered to do so. Another additional feature is the camera controls now have way more options, and you can now zoom so far in that you can essentially play the game in first person. And because you can turn off the display options around the screen, you can essentially use this to take screenshots with no characters on it, which is perfect for people like me who need over 100 unique thumbnails. But the thing is, the axis of rotation for all camera-related controls is at the center of your character's model. This means that if you zoom in all the way, it's not first person as if you're looking through their eyes. It's first person as if you're looking through a camera on their chest or waist. What's the point of having essentially a first person mode if you're looking through the chest level instead of eye level? I thought it was so cool to see the world of this game from a first person perspective whenever I just wanted to admire my surroundings, but it was a bit jarring that it would be from chest level. I really wish that if you zoomed in all the way it would be onto the character's head level, or maybe that instead be the axis of rotation. And now that Xenoblade Chronicles is possible to experience in first person, well, sort of. Something else I would have been a feature was VR, as I mentioned during the art discussion of this series. This didn't occur to me until I discovered the semi-first person mode. Just imagine being able to see the world of Xenoblade Chronicles as if you're seeing it through your own eyes. There's several VR supported Nintendo games out there, Breath of the Wild, Mario Odyssey, Smash Bros, but like, why would you ever want to experience any of these third-person games in VR? But Xenoblade, which is normally third-person, but now has the option for first-person, with its absolutely breathtaking world you could have the potential to see through your own eyes, it's such a missed opportunity to not have VR for this breathtaking experience. I don't know how difficult it is to program VR, but naturally the first thing I thought Xenoblade needed when I realized the remake let you go into first-person, sort of, was VR. One of the biggest new features Xenoblade Definitive brought to the table was Time Attack. This seems to be based off of the challenge mode introduced by Xenoblade Chronicles 2's expansion pass. Each challenge has options for using a pre-made party setup or your own free party setup, along with rewards for passing each with a certain rank. As well, you also receive Nopon Stone for completing trials. One of the things this Nopon Stone can be traded for is gear, including the resort gear I've mentioned before. It can also be traded for any gem that exists in the game, with you being able to trade for gems up to levels you've obtained before, as far as I can tell for how the unlocking works. Except level 6 gems. Level 6 gems are only obtained through gem crafting, or specific rewards for a few endgame side quests. Because level 6 are the best gems, if you want as perfective a build as you can have, there's no point equipping a gem under level 6, unless there's a specific situation where you already have a level 6 equipped, and equipping a lower level gem will still bring you up to the cap for how much that stat can be boosted. For example, you can get a maximum strength benefit from gems of 150, and a level 6 strength gem will typically give you 100 strength, so maybe a lower level gem will already be 50 or more anyway, but typically you just want to use a different gem anyway instead of not being able to get the full potential out of another. So I guess in post-game, gems under level 6 aren't exactly useless, but they're pretty niche, and there's no advantage to run them over level 6 anyway. It's so strange to me that you cannot change Nopon Stone for level 6 gems, meaning you still need to go out into the world killing whatever monster drops the crystals you need to craft with, over and over again. Because you cannot buy the best gems with Nopon Stone, there's basically no real point in trading Nopon Stone for gems, and it's something I never did. Another thing Nopon Stone can be traded for after you have completed the Future Connected epilogue is new Master Art Manuals. In the original release, you could level up arts to a maximum level of 10. Now with Time Attack and these Master Art Manuals, arts can now be leveled up to 12, making it possible to be a decent bit more powerful than in the original game. Unlocking the Master Art Manual of an art will also unlock any previous manual levels, meaning you can skip fighting certain enemies over and over again for the small chance that they drop the manual you need. However, if you want to perfect every character's art, prepare for a grind. One Master Art Manual costs 20,000 Nopon Stone. There are 104 arts in the game to potentially try to obtain the Master Art Manual for, meaning 2,080,000 Nopon Stone to obtain them all. The fastest way I can find to farm Nopon Stone through Google and YouTube is through a challenge that unlocks after clearing Future Connected, where you basically only need to kill the main boss. The strategy is to essentially nuke the enemy with Ryan with his Sword Drive art, being powered up by Berserker and Magnum Charge, while getting gem bonus damage from behind and the enemy being toppled. I've seen people do this in about 13 seconds, the fastest I've ever gotten was probably close to 15. Every time I do this, I get 6,400 Nopon Stone, and sometimes rarely 9,600 Nopon Stone, and I have no clue why. And in my quest to get over 2 million Nopon Stone, I got 12,800 Nopon Stone from the battle only twice during that whole time. So, let's assume it takes me 30 seconds to do the entire cycle of starting the challenge, loading screen, doing the challenge, loading screen, then going to the Nopon Arc stage and doing it again. So, let's assume that every 30 seconds is 6,400 Nopon Stone. Realistically, it would take a bit longer than that, but I'm being generous with the time, since from time to time it'll give 9,600 Nopon Stone instead. So, divide 2,080,000 Nopon Stone by 6,400, and you've got 325 times that you've got to do that. Multiply 325 times by 30 seconds per time, and you're looking at about 2.7 hours worth of doing this non-stop to get all the Master Arts Manuals. This actually isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, honestly. It's nowhere near the intensity of endgame Xenoblade Chronicles X grinding. I do wish that maybe the Master Art Manuals could have been, say, 10k Nopon Stone instead, to make it easier to ham them all out, because it still will take a long time to get them all, and I can't imagine how long it would take without a strategy like the Rhine nuke. The final thing you can obtain with Nopon Stone is collectibles and materials. However, the option to trade Nopon Stone for this is only unlocked right before the point of no return at the end of the story. So while you can use this to get collectibles or materials you need for side quests, or more commonly, for Colony 6 reconstruction, you basically have to wait until the point in which you've essentially beaten the game. So those stupid 6% spawning ice cabbages, unless you want to wait until the end of the game to get them for Colony 6, you better keep spending a few hours searching for them on Valak Mountain. What should have been done is allowing players to trade for collectibles and materials from the get-go, but only up to what's available in areas they've reached in the story thus far, so no getting items early. It's a nice feature to have if it's difficult to obtain items like ice cabbages, and it helps you continue to get collectibles or materials from areas of the world that you can no longer explore due to story reasons, but it really sucks that you need to reach the end of the game before you can do that, so this is useless for anybody who puts the game down after beating the final boss anyway. As well, in Xenoblade Chronicles 2's challenge mode, there existed 27 challenges to go into, so there's a whole lot to experience. In Xenoblade Definitive's equivalent time attack, there's a total of 10 challenges. This is nothing in comparison, and you wind up burning through all the additional content in no time. I really wish there had been more challenges available, some more stuff to experience here, rather than, let's just do a handful so that you have a means to obtain Nuppon Stone. I do like that Xenoblade Definitive brought time attack to the table, but the amount of challenges it offers just pales in comparison to Xenoblade 2. And for the rewards, the gems are next to useless, the art manuals are a bit too grindy to get all of them, and the collectibles and materials are only available at the end of the game anyway. I feel like time attack was a massive missed opportunity. The largest new addition Definitive brought to the table was the epilogue story of Future Connected, which, as I've mentioned, brought to life a cut area from the original game. This area honestly feels larger than Gaur Plains, and has plenty enough diversity with its areas to continue feeling fresh as you explore it. It gives you 4 party members to comprise your active party of 3, Shulk, Melia, Kino, and Nene, Kino and Nene of which essentially play the same as Charlotte and Ryan in the main game. Their arts have almost the same name as the characters they're based on, but with funny twists that are familiar but different. It's not quite as much choice and variety possible as in the main game, but it's definitely enough to mix and match a few setup options. It just becomes a bit tricky sometimes with these 4 as your only options, but it's also a fun way to figure out how to potentially use some new party setups. Just like how Xenoblade 2's Torna wound up changing chain attacks from the main game a bit, Future Connected changes chain attacks as well, except into something completely different. Now it is a Pawn Spectre attack, with 3 options for what type of attack to do. These attacks will be more powerful the more Pawn Spectres you've obtained around the world. These Pawn Spectres also follow you everywhere in the overworld, and fight enemies during battle as well. Essentially, you're walking around this world with a small private Nuppon army, and it's one of the greatest things I've ever seen. There's also a list of all the Pawn Spectres you have and have yet to obtain on your path to collect all 12. This is great, but why couldn't there have been something exactly like this for unique monsters in the main game? All in all, with everything to explore and do within this part of the world that's been brought back to life, Future Connected is fantastic additional content. As of writing this script, I've still only played Future Connected once right on release, one 8-hour sitting until beating it. But maybe at some point I'll consider 100%ing it, but after I came close to 100%ing the main game, I don't really know if I want to anymore. Outside of just gameplay, for my sort of review of Future Connected as a whole for this whole 3-part video series, I do think it's wonderful how this area cut from the original game has been brought back to life, how there's new objectives to complete such as collecting the Pawn Spectres, how this epilogue created an excuse to expose more absolutely fantastic music to continue filling my phone playlist, and how this story helps to wrap up Melia's character. I do wish that the story had more lore impacts to the worlds of Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and 2. It wasn't needed or anything, it just would have been nice. The lore of Future Connected left more questions than answers, but according to the art book, apparently it has connections to the future of Xenoblade Chronicles itself. So if we ever have a Xenoblade Chronicles 3, or even a Xenoblade Chronicles X2 that factors in these fog beasts in some way, then I'm sure Future Connected would be a great addition to the overall Xenoblade lore, and I can't wait to see what comes of it. To wrap up my arguments, at the end of the day, both of these games are either on par, or more oftentimes better than their original releases in almost every way. Exceptions being things such as the replacement system for gummies and Rescue Team DX having several flaws of its own, and Definitive Edition nerfing my pointless but fun side jump. Both of these games left their story completely unchanged, despite the fact that later titles learned from the storytelling mistakes of the original Rescue Team, and Xenoblade 2 made some changes and slightly retconned the story of Xenoblade, which was not at all accounted for in Definitive Edition. Both games embraced a new perspective into their respective worlds. Rescue Team DX with a new drawing/pop-up book art style that the series had not yet seen up to this point, adding a new level of charm and character to this world. Xenoblade Definitive threw its world into an art style akin to Xenoblade 2, which finally seems to give these characters the charm, life, and emotion they deserve. However, much of the world itself was left unchanged, which becomes very noticeable when you can point out the lines on the edge of a shore or tree, or get a really close-up shot of some really gross textures during certain cutscenes. From afar, the world is more beautiful than it's ever been, but up close, it still sometimes looks like I'm playing a Wii game. The remastered soundtrack of Rescue Team DX was great in many areas, and I have a great respect for the decision to aim for a mix of new and nostalgia by having a mix of new instruments and retro electronic sounds. However, I would argue it stayed too close to the original, with some of the OSTs sounding like it was directly ripped from the original releases, or having the electronic sounds drown out what was newly brought to the table, and making a repetitive mess that I grew incredibly tired of after hearing the same dungeon theme a few times. As well, doing as the original did of reusing previous dungeon themes from many of the post-game dungeons, and typically some of the worst main game dungeon themes, as opposed to creating new themes, or medleys such as for Oddity Cave, or even just using OST of other Mystery Dungeon games, is just such a majorly missed opportunity and results in what becomes an incredibly repetitive soundtrack to the point that I just completely turned it off towards the end of my playthrough. I don't dislike Mystery Dungeon soundtracks. They're some of my favorites in video game history, and are some of the most nostalgic and important leitmotifs to me. I'm as critical as I am because of how much the Mystery Dungeon soundtrack means to me. There are themes I absolutely adore within this remastered soundtrack, such as Pokémon Square, Monster House, Mount Thunder, Runaway, Sky Tower, and numerous more. But all the dungeon themes that aren't jammers, like Thunderwave Cave, Lapis Cave, Tiny Woods, and myriad others, just become insanely repetitive and annoying to me, especially when their themes continue to be reused throughout the rest of the postgame. This was a major missed opportunity to bring new life to the themes that didn't add up to the quality of the jammers, and to bring new original soundtrack or OST from other Mystery Dungeon games for the post-game dungeons, instead of reusing some of the worst of the soundtrack from the main game, sticking way too closely to the paths of the original releases. Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition doesn't boast a completely remastered soundtrack, having some be reused from the original release, though I would argue some of these themes, such as the main theme, don't have much room for improvement anyway. Several themes, instead of trying to improve what didn't need it, attempted a new style instead, such as Littoral Marsh. Much of the remastered soundtrack, rather than adding anything glaringly new, took the opportunity to flesh out what was already there and have a greater focus on the main parts of the themes. I would argue bringing it closer to the vision of what the OST wanted to achieve, and resulted in me having a much greater respect for themes I never realized were as good as they are. There are some themes that do up the intensity and add a new quality to the soundtrack, but for the most part, most of the remastered soundtrack just flushed out what was already there, and I would argue brought the existing soundtrack closer to its full potential. In addition, it introduced new soundtrack for the epilogue story of Future Connected, creating something original and fantastic for these events after the main story, as opposed to just reusing all of the soundtrack from the main game, as Rescue Team does for the events after its main game. The gameplay of Rescue Team DX plays out not as if it's a remake of Rescue Team while using the mechanics of the last most recent game in the PMD series, but rather as if it's a remake of Rescue Team with the mechanics and changes of a new original title in the Mystery Dungeon series. I found myself having more fun with Mystery Dungeon gameplay than I've ever had, when my teammates weren't killing shinies at least. The rare quality system was a fantastic idea to introduce something new for the use of gummies and PMD. However, the execution of this idea was majorly flawed due to the inability to switch or hunt rare qualities with ease, and being condemned to continue spamming your valuable DX gummies for about a 3% chance over and over again, just because you currently want a specific rare quality on that mon. The ability to choose your starter and have an actual awesome moveset is fantastic, but I do wish there had been more options brought to the table for who to play as. Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition makes incredible strides in its UI improvements, creating a much smoother and leagues easier to understand system. It introduces some new features, such as fashion armor or time attack, but both suffer from some flaws that make them at times feel a little clunky, unlike small changes would have made the world of a difference. In addition, while currently accepted quests are finally marked on the map to help complete any quests you've accepted, there's no improvements to actually being able to make sure you don't miss any quests, landmarks or locations, affinity links, or unique monster affinity coins before it becomes unobtainable forever. Xenoblade Chronicles remains one of the most frustrating games to 100% due to how easy it is to miss any tiny thing and no longer be able to have a truly perfect save file. Definitive Edition was an opportunity to remedy this. To have a version of Xenoblade Chronicles where not eyeing Xenoblade Wiki and numerous guides like a hawk means you're nearly guaranteed to miss something forever. Both Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Rescue Team DX and Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition are absolutely fantastic games, and will always hold a special place in my heart as remakes of some of the games nearest and dearest to my heart. I would without a doubt recommend both titles to anybody who has not yet experienced either, as they are absolutely worth your time. However, while both games improved on their formula, these were opportunities to really perfect each formula. Both are fantastic improvements over their originals, but yet both stuck too closely to their originals, and what's new that was brought to the table is ridden with problems of their own. I used to hold both these remakes in much higher esteem, and thought these videos would wind up being incredibly more positive than this when I initially started writing them. I guess it takes a couple hours worth of deep dive videos to really change one's opinion. As I progressed through each of these games, and as I continued writing the script over the course of last year, the issues of each became more and more evident to me, and what bothers me the most is that most of these issues would only need a little change to suddenly become fantastic. These are both far from perfect remakes, and majorly missed opportunities to really hone each of their respective formulas. I'll always adore both of these games, but it's because of that their issues really bug me. Go play Pokémon Mystery Dungeon, go play Xenoblade Chronicles. Both absolutely fantastic series. I never thought either of them had a chance of being remade, and I'm incredibly glad that both of them were given this chance to be revisited. It may be far from perfect, but both are still a fantastic new way to express some of the most impactful games of my life. If you missed part 1 and 2 and would like to check those out, you can find them on screen shortly or in the description below, along with all my other video essays. I'll also include my full playthrough of Blue Rescue Team, Rescue Team DX, Xenoblade Chronicles, and Xenoblade Definitive. If you've stuck out this 3-part video series to the end, thank you so much for giving my videos a chance. There's about 500 hours of YouTube videos uploaded every minute, so taking the time to check out some of my content is already more support than I could ever ask for, so thank you so much. Everything mentioned in this series has been my own opinion, and if your opinion is different from mine, I'd love to hear it in the comments below. With that, thank you so much for watching the video, and I'll see you next time.